Princess Valith Soren stood at the window of her chamber and watched the twin suns set over the crystal spires of the HFY homeworld. She had stood at this same window 1,000 times before, but tonight felt different somehow. The doctors had given her the news when she was just 16 years old. They told her that her body could never produce children, that her genetic code was broken in ways that could not be fixed, and that her royal bloodline would end with her. She remembered the day clearly, even now, 30 years later. The cold medical chamber, the emotionless faces of the geneticists, and her mother weeping silently in the corner while her father stood like a statue made of stone. The HFY were an ancient and proud species. They had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years, and their noble houses traced their bloodlines back to the first days of their civilization. But all that history meant nothing if you could not produce an heir. Valith had tried everything. She had visited the greatest medical centers in the Empire, consulted with geneticists from a dozen different worlds, and even sought help from the mysterious healers of the Outer Rim. Nothing worked, nothing changed, and eventually she stopped hoping her cousin Theris would inherit the throne instead. He never let her forget this fact, and she could see the hungry ambition in his eyes every time they spoke. He was already gathering allies and building his power base while she withered away in irrelevance. So when the Galactic Compact requested a HFY ambassador for the human frontier world of New Cascadia, Valith volunteered without hesitation. Everyone thought she was crazy because humans were considered dangerous and unpredictable by most civilized species. The HFY elders warned her about humans before she left. They told her that humans were emotional creatures who lived fast and died young, that they were violent and aggressive, and that they could not be trusted. Valith listened politely and ignored every word. She arrived on New Cascadia on a cold morning in the planet's winter season. The sky was gray and heavy with clouds, and snow fell gently on the landing platform as she stepped off her shuttle. A delegation of human officials waited to greet her. Commander Marcus Cole stood at the front of the group. He was tall for a human, with broad shoulders and dark hair that was starting to turn gray at the temples. His eyes were the color of the stormy sky above them, and when he looked at her, he did not look away. This surprised Valith, because HFY males always lowered their gaze in the presence of royalty. It was considered disrespectful to look directly at a princess, but Marcus Cole stared at her like she was just another person. She found this strange and oddly refreshing. "Welcome to New Cascadia, Princess," he said in a deep voice that seemed to rumble like distant thunder. "I hope your journey was comfortable." "It was acceptable," she replied in her formal diplomatic tone. "I look forward to beginning my work here." The first few weeks were difficult as Valith adjusted to life among humans. Everything about them was loud and intense and overwhelming. They talked with their hands, they laughed too loudly, and they showed their emotions on their faces like children who had never learned to control themselves. But she also noticed other things about them. She saw how fiercely they protected each other, how they would sacrifice their own comfort for the sake of their companions, and how they never seemed to give up no matter how difficult things became. Marcus Cole fascinated her the most. He was the military commander of the human settlement, responsible for protecting thousands of civilians from the dangers of the frontier. She watched him work and saw a man who cared deeply about his people. He smelled like coffee and gun oil. These were strange scents that she had never encountered before, and she found herself noticing them whenever he was nearby. It was an odd thing to focus on, but she could not help herself. One evening, she found him sitting alone in the observation lounge, staring out at the stars with a drink in his hand. She hesitated at the doorway, unsure whether to intrude on his solitude. "You can come in, Princess," he said without turning around. "I don't bite." She walked over and sat down across from him. "How did you know I was there?" "I heard you breathing," he replied with a small smile. Humans have good ears when we pay attention. They talked for hours that night. Marcus told her about his life, about the wars he had fought and the friends he had lost, about his dreams and his fears and his hopes for the future. In return, she found herself telling him things she had never told anyone. She told him about being declared barren at 16, about the weight of being a princess who could never fulfill her duty, and about the loneliness that had followed her like a shadow for 30 years. He listened without judgment and without pity. "That sounds like a heavy burden to carry," he said when she finished. "I'm sorry you've had to carry it alone for so long." No one had ever said anything like that to her before. HFY culture did not encourage such emotional honesty, and she felt something shift inside her chest at his words. It was a small crack in the wall she had built around her heart. The weeks turned into months, and Valeth found herself spending more and more time with Marcus. They walked together through the human settlement, ate meals together in the common hall, and talked late into the night about everything and nothing. She learned that humans were not the dangerous barbarians her people believed them to be. They were passionate and complicated and wonderful in ways she had never expected. And Marcus Cole was the most wonderful of them all for the first time in 30 years. Valeth felt something she had almost forgotten how to feel. She felt hope, and it terrified her more than any enemy she had ever faced. She did not know yet that her life was about to change forever. She did not know that the universe had plans for her that would shake the foundations of everything she believed. All she knew was that a human warrior had looked at her and seen not a barren princess, but simply a woman. And that was enough for now. The explosion came without warning on a quiet evening in the diplomatic quarter. One moment Valeth was reading reports in her office, and the next moment the world turned to fire and chaos and screaming. She found herself on the floor with dust and debris raining down around her. Her ears were ringing and her vision was blurred, but she forced herself to stand because that was what warriors did. She was a princess of the HFY Empire, and she would not die cowering on the ground. Marcus appeared in the doorway seconds later with blood running down the side of his face and a weapon in his hands. "Are you hurt?" he demanded. "I am fine," she replied, though her legs were shaking. "What happened?" "Terrorist attack," he said grimly. "We need to evacuate now. The whole building is coming down." They ran through corridors filled with smoke and fire. Valeth saw bodies on the ground and tried not to look too closely at their faces. Human and HFY alike had fallen in the blast, and there was no time to mourn them. The main exits were blocked by rubble. So Marcus led them down into the maintenance tunnels beneath the building. It was dark and cramped, and the air was thick with dust, but it was their only way out. They gathered survivors as they moved. A dozen humans and 3 HFY civilians joined their group, including a young HFY child who had been separated from his parents. The boy was terrified and crying, and he could not walk because his leg was injured. Marcus picked up the child without hesitation and carried him in his arms. The boy was heavy and Marcus was already wounded, but he did not complain or slow down. He simply kept moving forward, step after step after step. Valeth watched him with amazement as they traveled through the tunnels. 3 miles they walked in the darkness, and Marcus carried that child the entire way. His muscles must have been burning with exhaustion, but he never once asked for help or suggested they leave the boy behind. This was something she had never seen in her own people. HFY were logical and practical, and they would have calculated the odds and made the efficient choice. But Marcus Cole was not efficient. He was stubborn and emotional and absolutely determined to save everyone. They emerged from the tunnels on the outskirts of the settlement just as the sun was rising. Rescue teams found them there, exhausted and covered in dust but alive. The HFY child was reunited with his frantic parents, and Marcus finally allowed himself to collapse. Valeth sat beside him while the medics treated his wounds. "You are a remarkable human," she said quietly. He laughed, and even his laugh sounded tired. I'm just a soldier doing his job, Princess. No, she said firmly. You are much more than that. Something changed between them after that night. The professional distance they had maintained disappeared, and they became something closer. Valeth was not sure what to call it at first, but she knew that she wanted to be near him, that she felt safe when he was close. Marcus began to ask her questions that no one had ever asked before. He wanted to know about her favorite books and her childhood memories and her secret dreams. He looked at her not as a barren princess, but as Valeth, a person with hopes and fears and a heart that could still feel. They fell in love slowly and then all at once. It happened in stolen moments and quiet conversations and gentle touches that made her heart race. Valeth had never expected to find love, and she certainly had never expected to find it with a human. 3 months later, Valeth began to feel strange. She was tired all the time, and certain foods made her feel sick. She assumed it was stress from the attack and the rebuilding efforts, but Marcus insisted that she see a doctor. The human physician ran tests and then ran them again. She called in specialists and they ran even more tests. Valeth grew worried because they kept looking at her with strange expressions on their faces. Finally, the doctor sat down across from her and Marcus and took a deep breath. Princess Valeth, she said slowly, you are pregnant. Valeth felt the world tilt beneath her. That is impossible, she whispered. I cannot bear children. My genetics do not allow it. I don't know how to explain it, the doctor admitted. But the tests are clear. You are carrying a healthy child. The news spread quickly and soon reached the HFY homeworld. The imperial geneticists refused to believe it at first. They called it a mistake, a contamination of the samples, a malfunction of the human equipment. But when their own tests confirmed the pregnancy, they had no choice but to accept the truth. Scientists from across the empire came to study Valeth and the miracle growing inside her. They took samples and ran simulations and argued with each other about what it all meant. Finally, they reached a conclusion that changed everything. Human DNA was different from anything they had ever seen. It was wild and flexible and adaptable in ways that should not have been possible. Where HFY genetics had become rigid and fragile after millennia of careful breeding, human genes were chaos given form. Somehow the chaos was exactly what Valeth needed. Marcus's DNA had bridged the gaps in her own genetic code, filling in the broken places and creating something new. Their child would be a hybrid, the first of her kind, and she would be healthy and strong. Valeth wept when she heard the news. She wept for 30 years of believing she was broken, for all the dreams she had buried, and for the future that was suddenly bright with possibility. Marcus held her while she cried and promised her that everything would be all right. The HFY Empire was shaken to its core by the discovery. The barren princess would bear an heir after all, and that heir would be half human. Some celebrated this miracle, while others viewed it with suspicion and fear. Lord Theris received the news in his private chambers and crushed the glass he was holding in his fist. Blood ran down his fingers, but he did not notice. 30 years of careful planning were crumbling before his eyes, and he would not allow that to happen in the months that followed. As Valeth's pregnancy progressed, dark forces began to gather. There were those who could not accept a hybrid heir, who believed that human blood would taint the royal line forever. They whispered in shadows and made plans that would bring death and destruction. But Valeth did not know this yet. She only knew that she was finally going to be a mother, that the man she loved was by her side, and that the universe had given her a second chance at happiness. She placed her hand on her growing belly and felt her daughter move inside her. We will protect you, she promised. No matter what comes, we will keep you safe. Marcus put his hand over hers and nodded. Together they would face whatever the future held. The first assassin came on a quiet night when the moons hung low over the settlement. Valeth was sleeping peacefully in her chamber when Marcus suddenly grabbed her arm and pulled her to the floor. "Stay down," he hissed into the darkness a blade whistled through the air where her head had been just a moment before. The assassin was a shadow dressed in black, moving with deadly grace across the room. But Marcus was already moving too, and his reactions were faster than the killer expected. The fight was brutal and brief. Marcus took a cut across his ribs but managed to disarm the assassin and pin him to the ground. Guards burst into the room seconds later and took the would-be killer into custody. Valith stood on shaking legs and looked at the man who had just tried to murder her. He was HFY, she realized with horror. One of her own people had been sent to kill her. "Who sent you?" she demanded. The assassin smiled coldly and bit down on something hidden in his mouth. Poison took him before anyone could stop it, and his secrets died with him. This was only the beginning. Over the following weeks, 3 more assassination attempts followed. One was a poison meal that Marcus detected by the slight discoloration of the sauce. Another was a bomb hidden in a diplomatic package. And the third was a sniper who fired from a rooftop each time Marcus saved her. Each time, his human instincts and reflexes proved faster and sharper than anyone expected. The HFY bodyguards assigned to protect her were competent and well-trained. But they simply could not match what evolution had given to humanity. Humans had evolved as persistent predators on a harsh and dangerous world. Their ancestors had survived by being tougher and more stubborn than anything else on their planet. They did not give up, they did not stop, and they did not let their prey escape. Marcus Cole was the product of millions of years of that evolution. He could sense danger before it arrived, react faster than logic would suggest, and keep fighting long after his body should have failed. Valith began to understand why the galaxy was afraid of humans. The investigation into the assassination attempts led back to the HFY homeworld. Someone with power and resources was funding the attacks, and there was only one person who had both the motive and the maze. Means Lord Theris denied everything when confronted by Imperial investigators. He expressed shock and outrage at the accusations and demanded that the investigation focus elsewhere. But Valith knew the truth, even if she could not prove it. Situation grew more dangerous when the High Council of the HFY Empire issued a formal summons. Princess Valith was ordered to return to the homeworld immediately to present herself and her unborn child to the court. There was no mention of Marcus in the summons. Valith studied the document with growing dread. "They want me to come alone," she said. "That's not going to happen." Marcus replied flatly. "Humans are forbidden from setting foot on the HFY homeworld," she reminded him. "Ancient laws that have stood for thousands of years prevent any outsider from entering the Imperial Palace. If you come with me, they could have you executed." Marcus shrugged like this was a minor inconvenience. "Then I guess they'll have to catch me first. This is not a joke." Valith felt tears burning in her eyes. "If you come with me, you could die. If you stay here, I might never see you again. Either way, we lose." He walked over and took her hands in his. His grip was warm and steady and filled with certainty. "Listen to me," he said gently. "I did not survive 2 wars to let bureaucracy take my family. I do not care about their ancient laws or their traditions or their threats. You are my wife, and that child is my daughter, and I will be there when she is born. They will try to stop you." Valith warned. "They can try," he agreed. "But humans are stubborn, Princess. We do not accept impossible as an answer." The journey to the HFY homeworld took 3 weeks. Valith spent most of that time preparing Marcus for what he would face. She taught him the customs and protocols of the imperial court, the proper forms of address, and the subtle signals that HFY used to communicate respect or contempt. Marcus learned quickly. He had a soldier's discipline and a sharp mind, and he absorbed information like a sponge absorbs water. By the end of the journey, He could navigate a formal dinner without causing a diplomatic incident, but Valith knew that knowledge alone would not be enough. The court would hate him simply for being human, and Lord Theris would use every trick available to destroy them both. They were walking into the den of their enemies, with no allies and no escape. "Are you afraid?" she asked him on their last night before arrival. "Terrified," he admitted. "But fear has never stopped me before. What does stop you?" He thought about the question for a moment. "Death, I suppose. But even that only works if they can manage to kill me." Despite everything, Valith laughed. It felt good to laugh, and she realized that Marcus had given her that gift. He made her feel alive in ways she had forgotten were possible. Their ship dropped out of hyperspace above the Kethvari homeworld. The planet hung in the void like a jewel of blue and silver, its ancient cities gleaming beneath swirling clouds. It was beautiful and terrible, and it had been 30 years since Valith had called it home. A fleet of warships surrounded them immediately. These were not escorts, but guards, and their weapons were armed and ready. The message was clear. The princess and her human husband were not welcome here. Last chance to turn back. Marcus said as he watched the fleet through the viewport. Valith placed her hand on her belly, where her daughter was kicking strongly. "We do not turn back," she said firmly. "We face what comes." Marcus smiled and took her hand. "That's my girl." Together they descended toward the planet that wanted to destroy them. Together they would fight for their family and their future. And together they would show the Kethvari Empire what humans were truly capable of. Marcus Cole became the first human to walk the crystal halls of the Kethvari Imperial Palace in all of recorded history. Every eye in the court followed him as he entered, and he could feel their hatred pressing against him. Like a physical weight, the Kethvari nobles looked at him with disgust and contempt. They saw a primitive creature from a young and foolish species, an animal that had somehow corrupted their princess with its inferior genetics. They whispered insults in their own language, assuming he could not understand, but Valith had taught him well. Marcus understood every word they said, and he filed each insult away in his memory for later. He would not forget, but he would not react either. Soldiers learned patience, and Marcus was a very patient man. The Imperial Palace was the most beautiful building he had ever seen. Its walls were made of living crystal that sang softly when the wind passed through them, and its towers reached so high that their tops disappeared into the clouds. It had taken 1,000 years to build, and it showed the wealth and power of the Kethvari at the height of their civilization. Marcus felt small in this place, but he did not let that feeling show. He walked beside Valith with his head held high and his back straight, and he met the gaze of anyone who dared to look at him. He was a human warrior, and he would not bow to anyone. The emperor himself received them in the throne room. He was ancient and frail, with skin like cracked parchment and eyes that had seen 10,000 years pass by. He looked at Marcus with curiosity rather than contempt, and that gave Marcus hope. "So you are the human who has given my granddaughter what we could not," the emperor said in a voice like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "I am Marcus Cole." "Your Majesty," he replied with a proper bow that Valith had drilled into him. "I love your granddaughter, and I will protect her and our child with my life." The emperor studied him for a long moment. "We shall see," he said finally. "We shall see what you are made of, human." The days that followed were a constant trial. Marcus endured every insult and every test with quiet dignity. He learned the complex rituals of the court and performed them correctly. He showed respect to those who deserved it. And he bit his tongue when nobles said horrible things about him, and his Specious Velith watched him with growing admiration. She had expected him to lose his temper, to fight back against the endless provocations. But Marcus was smarter than that. He understood that every angry outburst would be used against them, so he gave them nothing to use. Lord Theris was not content to wait. He could see that the human was winning over some members of the court with his patience and dignity, and that could not be allowed to continue. So he chose a different strategy at a formal dinner attended by all the noble houses. Theris rose from his seat and pointed an accusing finger at Marcus. "I challenge the legitimacy of the princess's child," he declared loudly so everyone could hear. "How do we know this creature is truly the father? How do we know this is not some human trick to infiltrate our bloodline?" The hall went silent. This was a grave accusation, and it demanded a response. Marcus stood slowly and faced his enemy. "You are calling my wife a liar and my daughter a fraud," he said calmly. "Those are words that require blood to answer." A gasp ran through the assembled nobles. Everyone knew what came next. "I invoke the ancient right of honorable combat," Marcus continued. "You have insulted my family, and I demand satisfaction." Theris smiled because this was exactly what he wanted. The ancient tradition of honorable combat had not been used in centuries, but it was still valid law. If Marcus lost, his claims would be considered false, and his family would be disgraced. If he won, Theris's accusations would be withdrawn permanently. "I accept your challenge, human," Theris said with obvious pleasure. "We fight at dawn." Valith was furious with Marcus that night. "You've been training in combat for 300 years," she shouted. "He is faster than you, stronger than you, and more skilled than you. You cannot win this fight." "Maybe not," Marcus admitted, "but I have to try." "Why? Why do you have to throw your life away?" He took her hands and looked into her silver eyes. "Because if I back down now, they will never respect us. They will always see me as a coward and our daughter as illegitimate. This is the only way to settle it once and for all." The duel took place in the arena of the Imperial Palace as the first. Light of dawn painted the crystal towers golden rose. Thousands of Kethvari gathered to watch the spectacle. They expected to see the primitive human destroyed by their champion Theris. Entered the arena in ceremonial armor with a blade that had been in his family for 1,000 years. He was elegant and deadly, moving with the grace of a predator who had never known defeat. Confidence radiated from him like heat from a flame. Marcus entered wearing simple combat clothes and carrying a standard military blade. He looked plain and unremarkable compared to his opponent. The crowd laughed at the contrast. The fight began at the sound of a bell. Theris attacked with blinding speed, his blade a silver blur that seemed impossible to follow. Marcus barely blocked the first strike, and the second opened a cut on his arm. The Kethvari cheered. This would be over quickly, but Marcus did not fall. He took the wound and kept fighting. Theris cut him again and again, on his shoulder, his chest, his leg. Blood soaked through his clothes and dripped onto the arena floor. And still Marcus did not fall. The crowd grew quiet as they realized something was wrong. The human should have collapsed by now. Any Kethvari would have succumbed to such wounds. But Marcus kept fighting, kept blocking, kept moving forward. Theris began to tire. His strikes grew slower, his breathing heavier. He had never fought an enemy who simply refused to die. The human was bleeding from a dozen wounds, and yet he kept coming like death itself. Finally, after what felt like hours, Theris made a mistake. His exhausted muscles betrayed him, and his guard dropped for just a moment. Marcus seized that moment and struck. Theris fell to the ground with Marcus's blade in his throat. The arena was completely silent. "Yield," Marcus said. Through bloody lips, Theris stared up at him with disbelief and terror. "How?" he whispered. "How are you still alive?" "Humans do not give up," Marcus replied. "We do not stop fighting until the fight is over. And this fight is over." He could have killed Theris. The law allowed it. But instead, Marcus stepped back and lowered his blade. "Your accusations are withdrawn," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This matter is settled." He offered Theris his hand, The gesture shocked everyone. Mercy was not common in HFY culture, and certainly not expected from a human. Theris stared at the offered hand for a long moment before finally accepting it. Marcus helped his defeated enemy to his feet, and in that moment, everything changed. The nobles who had despised him now looked at him with something closer to awe. They had just witnessed something they would never forget. A human had defeated their greatest warrior through sheer endurance and will, and then he had shown mercy. It was the most human thing Marcus could have done, and it won him more respect than any victory ever could. Velith's daughter came into the world on a night when 3 comets streaked across the sky above the imperial palace. The HFY believed such signs meant great destiny, and Velith chose to believe it too. The birth was difficult and lasted many hours. Marcus stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, even when the pain made her want to scream. The royal physicians had never seen a hybrid birth before, and they watched with scientific fascination as history unfolded when the baby finally arrived. Her first cry echoed through the chamber like a song. Velith wept with joy as she held her daughter for the first time. The child was perfect, with silver eyes like her mother and a strong, stubborn jaw like her father. "Sarah," Velith whispered. "Her name is Sarah." Marcus looked confused. "What does it mean?" "It means bridge," Velith explained. "Because she is a bridge between our peoples, between what was and what will be." The emperor came to see the child the next morning. He was so old and frail that servants had to help him walk, but he insisted on meeting his great-granddaughter. He looked down at Sarah with ancient eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. "She is strong," he observed. "I can feel it in her. She has the best of both species within her." "She does," Marcus agreed proudly. The emperor turned to Marcus with a strange expression. "You have surprised us, human. We expected you to fail, to prove that your species was as primitive as we believed. But you have shown us something we did not expect." "What is that, Your Majesty?" "Hope," the emperor said simply. "You have shown us hope." The news of Sarah's birth spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Scientists and diplomats and ordinary citizens talked of nothing else. The miracle child had survived, and she was healthy and thriving. What had seemed impossible was now reality. The implications were staggering. The HFY were not the only species facing genetic stagnation. Dozens of ancient races were slowly dying because their bloodlines had grown too narrow, their genes too fragile. They had resigned themselves to extinction over countless generations. But now, there was another option. Human DNA, with its wild flexibility and adaptive power, could bridge gaps that had seemed unbridgeable. Humans could give these dying species what they could not give themselves. Future delegations began arriving from across the galaxy. Proud species who had once looked down on humanity now came seeking partnerships and alliances. They brought gifts and proposals and desperate pleas for help. They had swallowed their pride because survival mattered more than dignity. The humans said yes. They always said yes. This was perhaps the most remarkable thing about humanity, Velith realized. When other species needed help, humans helped them. It did not matter if those species had insulted them or threatened them or dismissed them as primitives. Humans helped anyway, because that was simply what they did. Velith's father, the crown prince, passed away 2 years after Sarah's birth. The emperor followed him a year later, finally releasing his grip on a life that had lasted far too long. And so Velith ascended to the throne as Empress of the HFY Empire. She was the first empress in 1,000 years. And she was the first ruler in history to have a human consort. Marcus stood beside her at the coronation ceremony as prince consort, wearing ceremonial robes that looked strange on his human frame. He hated the formal clothes, but he wore them without complaint. Their reign ushered in an era of unprecedented change. Valith reformed ancient laws that had kept the Kethvari isolated from other species. She opened trade routes and diplomatic channels and educational exchanges. She built bridges where there had only been walls. Marcus focused on military cooperation and mutual defense. He trained Kethvari soldiers in human tactics and learned their techniques in return. He forged alliances with warrior cultures across the galaxy, binding them together through shared purpose rather than shared blood. But it was Sarah who truly changed everything. She grew up as living proof that different species could come together and create something beautiful. She was smart and kind and fierce, with her mother's wisdom and her father's stubborn determination. When Sora was 5 years old, she attended her first formal court function. She wore a tiny version of the imperial robes and sat on a small throne beside her parents. The nobles who had once despised her human heritage now bowed before her with genuine respect. That evening, as Marcus tucked her into bed, Sarah asked him a question that would stay with him forever. "Father," she said in her small voice, "why don't the other children at court have human parents too?" Marcus felt his heart break and swell at the same time. His daughter did not understand why she was special. To her, having a human parent was simply normal, and she could not imagine why everyone did not have the same. "They will," he promised her. "Give it time," and time proved him right. In the years that followed, more and more hybrid children were born across the galaxy. Humans partnered with dozens of species, bridging genetic gaps and creating new possibilities. The children of these unions were strong and healthy and full of potential. Some people called it the human miracle. Others called it the Great Synthesis. But whatever name it was given, the result was the same. Species that had been dying were now thriving. Bloodlines that had been dead ends now continued into the future of Velith watched this transformation with wonder. She remembered being a barren princess, alone and hopeless, believing that her life had no purpose. Now she was an empress, a wife, a mother, and a symbol of hope for the entire galaxy. One morning, she found Marcus standing on the balcony of their chambers, looking out over the crystal city as the twin suns rose. He was older now, his dark hair fully gray, and the scars from his many battles made a map across his skin. But he was still the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago on New Cascadia. "What are you thinking about?" she asked as she joined him. "I was thinking about how strange life is," he admitted. "I was just a soldier on a frontier world. I never expected any of this. An alien princess, a miracle daughter, changing the fate of the galaxy. It sounds like something from a story." "It is a story," Velith said softly. "It is our story." She took his hand and they watched the sunrise together. Behind them, they could hear Sarah waking up, calling for her breakfast. In a moment, they would go to her and begin another day of ruling an empire and raising a child and building a future. But for now, they stood together. A human warrior and a Kethvari empress. Living proof that love could cross any boundary and hope could overcome any obstacle. The universe had told Velith she could never bear children. The universe had been wrong. And because of that, everything had changed. Humanity had given the galaxy a gift it did not know it needed. They had given it adaptability and stubbornness and an endless capacity for love. They had given it hope, and that hope would carry them all into a brighter tomorrow.